I sent about 3,805 emails to administrators all across Brown University to answer a simple question. Why is our tuition rising to $93,000 a year?
A student journalist hilariously trolled administrators at his left-wing Ivy League college, and now they're trying to crack down on him. We're going to break down the latest insanity out of the Ivy League, plus new legislation in honor of alleged killer Luigi Mangione, another crazy moment from The View, and so much more. On today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where we take on the craziest ideas from across our media, our politics, and the internet, all from an independent perspective. Up first, like I mentioned, we got to talk about another free speech scandal, this time coming at Brown University. It's actually in my backyard. I grew up in Rhode Island and Massachusetts. Brown is this elite private school that is very left-wing, like very, very left-wing. But apparently some of its students are fans of Elon Musk and Doge and the Trump administration's efforts to cut waste, because one of them decided to troll administrators by sending some 3,000 administrators at Brown an email simply asking, "What did you do this week?" Suffice it to say, this act of student journalism was not received well, and the university is investigating him over it. The student in question is working with my friends at FIRE, the nonpartisan Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, where, disclaimer, I do some freelance work with them, and they actually spoke about it. They got this story covered on Newsmax. Take a listen to some of that coverage now.
Remember that email that Elon Musk sent asking federal government workers to list 5 things they did that week in order to justify their jobs? Yeah, you probably do. Well, a student at one of America's top universities is doing the exact same thing as college tuition costs continue to go through the roof. Meet Alex Shea. He's a sophomore at Brown University. Notice a chainsaw there? He is studying computer science and economics, and he recently emailed all 3,805 non-institutional staff members at the Ivy League school asking pretty much the same question that Elon did. Describe the tasks you did in the past week and how those tasks justify your position. Well, Shea got some replies, including a few we can't share with you on TV. It is a daytime show after all. But very few genuine answers, perhaps no surprise. One person responding, "Bro, if you think Brown is too expensive, go to another school."
Guys, I love this kid. I love his audacity. I love his guile. Whoever, if it was him, if it was someone else who thought of this idea, it's brilliant. It's hilarious, and it is ultimately pretty innocent. Not something that should get a student in trouble. But the administrators did not see any humor in this, and I'm going to read you a couple details from FIRE's article about this story. 2 days after he sent his email, Brown told Shea it was reviewing his Doge-inspired email based on allegations that he had, quote, emotionally harmed several employees and, quote, misrepresented himself by saying he was a reporter for the conservative student newspaper, the Brown Spectator, which he was. Okay, this detail triggered me. What do you mean, emotionally harmed? Girl, what? Excuse me? Are you not adults? Are the administrators at this elite Ivy League college campus actually harmed by an email asking them what they did at work and to justify their jobs? Baby, you could have deleted it. You didn't have to answer. You literally could have just ignored this email and gone about your day. And if you, as a grown adult who's supposed to be in charge of an institution of higher learning and administrating the campus and running this big organization, cannot handle an email of somebody asking you a question without having some sort of emotional internal attack that you feel, then baby, you belong in like remedial therapy because you lack the emotional resilience of a functioning adult, and so probably shouldn't be running complex multi-million or even billion-dollar organizations. And why are they saying he misrepresented himself as a journalist when he is a student journalist? And again, anybody can be a journalist. Anyone can do journalism. It's a verb, not a title. It's not like a doctor where you have to have a certain degree to qualify as it. So that's just a weird way to kind of attempt to discredit him, I guess, but it's not working, at least not in my book. Now, I'm going to tell you guys a personal story that I had in my college days that this story reminds me of after this. When it comes to the debate over LGBT issues, Americans increasingly live in different realities, and our media does too. Take this recent story we talked about on the show, where a congressperson named Sarah McBride, who identifies as a transgender woman, was referred to as congressman by one of their colleagues. If you only read partisan media, whether it's on the left or on the right, you would really struggle to find out what actually happened here. But using Ground News, an amazing service that I've personally used for years and that helps me prepare this show, you can see what both sides are saying and make up your own mind. It also tells you everything you need to know about a source's bias, factuality, and ownership. Back to this particular story, well, on the left, look at CNN's headline. Out of order, hearing abruptly ends after GOP lawmaker misgenders Congresswoman. Meanwhile, over on the right, The Blaze covered the story like this. Democrat melts down after cross-dressing comrade called Mr. during House hearing. That's quite the difference. And on Ground News, you can see over 150 different headlines, all describing this same story, which is a great example of why Ground News is a better way to consume the news, because everything you need to know is all in one place. What's more, using Ground News, you can get a neutral summary of the story, see how both sides are framing it, see who's covering it and who isn't, and most importantly, use your critical thinking skills to make up your own mind. I already knew media bias was bad, but using Ground News has really helped me see through it and bring you a fair and balanced show. You can get the same plan that I use, which is the Vantage subscription, if you sign up through the link on screen, ground.news/Brad, or use the QR code to get 40% off unlimited access, which comes out to just about $5 a month. This exclusive discount is available through this link, so act now to break your media bubble and keep your critical thinking skills sharp. Now, back to today's show. So like Alex Shea, I was a bit of a shit stirrer in my college days, I must admit. I went to the University of Massachusetts Amherst, which is like a super far left, very woke college. I just went there because in-state tuition, pretty decent public school. I didn't go there based on ideology or anything like that. But I was somewhat out of sorts there. I didn't exactly fit in politically or culturally. And I was also pissed by how expensive college was and how much waste and bloat I saw around me. So I actually, in my first ever foray into professional journalism, I published an article in the Boston Globe calling out UMass for how much they wasted our money and how they kept raising tuition even though they were spending insane amounts on things like sports. They had a crazy number of administrators. They even decked out and we had like the #1 campus dining. And I'm like, dude, this is supposed to be a public school. Maybe focus on having it be accessible, not on having the best food out of every college in all of America. They served like lobsters and steak and stuff at times, which was nice, but again, not really how a public university should be prioritizing its budget. So I published this op criticizing the administrators, and they threatened to sue the Boston Globe for like libel or defamation or whatever, and demanded retractions. And they sent a list to the editor of all these factual errors that were just like their opinion. It would be like, oh, well, Polumbo highlighted this in his article about how expensive the food is, but fact check, having great campus dining is a top attraction for students to come to UMass. Like, that's not a fact check, babe. That's just you arguing your opinion. Anyway, I didn't get in any trouble with the school, thankfully. Although, because it was a public school, I don't think they could have. They could have potentially gotten sued for the First Amendment violation there. Fun fact, my school had a free speech zone and was sued over that as well. But while they couldn't do much to me at my public campus because I had the First Amendment protecting me, I think these Brown administrators feel more emboldened to go after Alex Shea because it's a private university. But as I'll explain, that's still kind of problematic. First, though, take a listen to this clip of Alex later on in that Newsmax interview where he hits on something I think is important about this story.
Alex, did you think it would end up like this when you sent those emails?
No, absolutely not. But you got that right. Last week, I sent about 3,805 emails to administrators all across Brown University to answer a simple question. Why is our tuition rising to $93,000 a year next year? And by the end of the decade, it's easily going to reach six figures. And I'll tell you where that money's not going. It's not going to the facilities, that's for sure. I'm in the basement of my dorm right now at Brown University, and this room, this floods whenever it rains. This room floods. And we've got a fan going in the background. We've got these wet floor signs all around. There's a plastic tarp on the floor that I'm sitting on right now because this room, they can't keep the basement from flooding. And we all know that those professors are criminally underpaid. So where does the money go? It goes to about 3,805 administrators. That's more than twice as many as the number of faculty that's on staff. It's also about one for every two undergrads. Brown's not a big state school. We've only got about 7,200 undergrads. And so I think it's ridiculous.
So he just exposed there the fact that I think is motivating the Brown administrators who want to shut this kid up, who want to punish him and investigate him for daring to question them. And they made up some bogus thing about him using confidential information, but he didn't. He just used publicly available names and titles and email addresses. He pointed out that they have one administrator for every two undergraduate students at Brown. That's insane. That is a level of administration and vice provosts of deputy chancellor assistant to the whatever that is obviously excessive and wasteful, and I'm sure wastes millions and millions and millions of dollars that could be instead passed along in the form of lower tuition prices, more compensation for the professors who actually teach, or all sorts of other important things. But instead, the hardcore left-wing types who form the administration on many college campuses, they band together and they get that bag, and then they hire their friends, and then they kind of make up perpetuations for why their jobs are important, and in reality, it's kind of all a slush fund. Alex shined a light on that, and I think that's why they're trying to shut him up. But what makes this so funny to me is that not only does Brown University promise its students freedom of speech, which clearly they're not all that serious about, and promise its student journalists freedom of the press, which, again, if you're investigating students for sending administrators an email asking them basic questions that, again, they didn't have to respond to, then you don't actually respect those things. But the funny thing, the deeply ironic thing here, is that the president of Brown University recently released a very dramatic public statement vowing that Brown will resist the Trump administration's efforts to crack down on free speech on their campus. And I'm like, babe, look in the mirror. You're investigating and intimidating students and student journalists on your own campus. Maybe do something about that first. But what do you guys think? Did you find this story as hilarious and iconic as I did? Do let me know in the comments. I do take the time to read the comments and I always love hearing what you guys have to say. And please do consider hitting that like button and even subscribing while you're at it. Up next, activists in California want to officially reward terrorism. At least that's the obvious implication of a new, incompetent, and unhinged effort to pass healthcare policy legislation in California via ballot initiative named after the alleged murderer, Luigi Mangione, who's somehow getting lots of public support after allegedly killing healthcare CEO Brian Thompson in cold blood. Take a listen to this coverage from News Nation that sums up the push in this initiative that they're moving forward.
Proposed ballot measure in California is about to take on some of the nation's biggest health insurance companies, but it's also raising questions for its ties to a murder that sent shockwaves all across the country. So this initiative is named after Luigi Mangione. He is the man suspected of killing United Healthcare's CEO. And this targets insurance companies that would delay or deny medical procedures even after a doctor's approval.
It's officially called the Luigi Mangione Access to Healthcare Act. And the name, as you might guess, stirring a lot of controversy, for it seems to honor an accused killer. As Mangione faces a New York trial for the murder of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, Californians will soon be petitioned on whether or not an initiative inspired by his alleged actions should make it onto a ballot in November of next year. The proposed legislation would make it a felony for insurance companies to delay, deny, or modify any medical procedure or medication suggested by a licensed doctor in California, especially if denials lead to consequences such as disability, amputation, or death. The initiative specifies that delays and denials can only be made by doctors on behalf of insurers.
Hey, so this is demonic. This is demented. In America, we do not reward political terrorism, intentionally using violence to send a political message by giving people what they want. I mean, if I have any liberals or progressives watching me who are somehow sympathetic to Mangione, no shade, but hear me out. How would you feel if a vigilante right-winger went and killed a Planned Parenthood executive, and then in a red state, they introduced pro-life legislation named after the killer? That would be insane. That would obviously be reprehensible and irresponsible, and very likely to encourage copycats. I hope that you can see why, even if you hate our healthcare system, even if you think insurance executives are evil, all of that, set that aside for a moment. We can't go down this path. We can't start rewarding people when they go Rambo in open season and start executing people they don't like in the streets. Oh yeah, here, now we'll give you what you want. What do you think is going to happen if that's successful? More people will do this kind of thing, and they'll do it to your side and the causes that you support that they might view as responsible for people's deaths in different ways, all of which is subjective. And again, a lot of the people at the fringes of these conversations are not super stable and don't have the most clear-headed view of some of these issues. And now we're going to reward that and say, oh yeah, you kill someone, you get legislation named after you. In my book, even if it was a cause that I agreed with, even if it was an issue or legislation that on the merits I really thought was great, I would never support that and the dangerous precedent that it sets. Now, Reason Magazine's Christian Britsky has a great article about this where he actually pointed out that the dude who introduced this ballot initiative spelled Luigi Mangione's name wrong, which to me was like an impressive level of stupidity. You're literally naming legislation after someone and you spelled it incorrectly. Yikes. Not off to a great start. But Christian further explained how the legislation itself is completely idiotic and unworkable. Even if you think our health insurance system needs reform, this isn't it. Insurers basically wouldn't be able to deny any claim a doctor approves, no matter how insanely expensive, or even if there's a much cheaper option that has the same results. As Christian writes for Reason, insurers would have to rely on their own doctors to deny a claim or reduce payment for a procedure. If an insurer is sued for denying a claim, they would have to prove with clear and convincing evidence that the procedure is unnecessary. This would mean that an insurer couldn't argue they are denying a claim because the provider's proposed costs are outrageously high. The consequences of this initiative would be sweeping and probably fatal for private insurance in California. Almost every treatment a doctor would recommend could plausibly be defended as at least protecting some bodily function, and proving that a treatment is in fact unnecessary would be a very high bar. So you might believe that these insurance companies, United, are denying too many claims and are stingy, and we can discuss whether that's true. But they have to deny some claims. And if they were forced to accept any claim that's medically necessary, no matter how high the costs, obviously that would increase costs and lots of expensive bills would be filed and approved. And the inevitable consequence there is either these insurance companies go bust or your premiums get raised a lot. This is not the kind of thoughtful reform our system needs. Christian further writes that in effect, the ballot initiative would put insurers in a position of either immediately approving every claim submitted to them or fighting a lawsuit that they'd almost certainly lose. Since the ballot initiative guarantees successful litigants against insurance companies treble damages and attorney's fees, anyone whose claim was denied would have a major incentive to sue. Just what America needs. More lawsuits. The Reason article continues, because the initiative effectively prohibits insurers from even reducing payment for a procedure, they would also effectively lose their ability to bargain with healthcare providers over prices. That would give healthcare providers a very obvious incentive to raise prices on all of their services. At a minimum, insurers would have to massively raise premiums to cover the new costs they'd be exposed to under this proposed system. Spiking premiums would see them shed customers and plausibly go out of business completely. One couldn't imagine a better system for creating an insurer death spiral. So I am just shocked that the legislation introduced by the pro-Luigi Mangione death cult is actually dysfunctional and incoherent. Just kidding. I'm not surprised at all, because a lot of these people are very angry, sometimes validly so based on personal experiences, but not a lot of them have grappled with the complexities of our healthcare system and how seriously reforming it is incredibly difficult. And if they're celebrating somebody murdering someone as if that made anything better, then in my view, they're clearly driven by emotional imbalances, not logical thinking or serious policy consideration. So it doesn't surprise me that the ballot initiative being proposed here is so incoherent and policy just inept, but it is the kind of thing that concerns me, because if they could get the signatures to get this on the ballot in California, I think it could pass. Because if you just tell people, yes or no, do you want to vote to make it illegal for insurance companies to deny claims? People will just say, oh, that sounds good. Yeah, insurance companies should cover any necessary healthcare. They won't think it through. They won't understand all the ramifications and the costs, and they'll just vote to approve it. And then suddenly their healthcare premiums will skyrocket even higher. They're already outrageous. Or insurance companies will just shut down operation in California. Either way, not great. But this is the Free Luigi movement for you, folks. I, for one, am not impressed, but do let me know what you think in the comments. All right, now we'll run through some quick hits to round up today's show. And up first, this woke journalist just went on an unhinged rant on The View about white men, of course. Take a listen to journalist Eli Mistel talking to the host of The View about his new book.
One of the laws you write about is playing out right now, the Immigration and Nationality Act. Now, this administration is using this statute to justify the detentions and possible deportations, actually, of visa and green card holders who they seem to deem a threat to U.S. foreign policy. What do you make of the administration's use of the act? And more broadly, is Trump really setting up a First Amendment showdown, which is what Whoopi's been talking about?
Yes, absolutely. One of my premises for the book is that every law passed before the 1965 Voting Rights Act should be presumptively unconstitutional. Right? But because before the 1965 Voting Rights Act, we were functionally an apartheid country. Yeah. Not everybody who lived here could vote here. So why should I give about some law that some old white man passed in the 1920s?
Wow, that's a wild statement to actually air on daytime television. Of course, it is horrible that black people were not allowed to vote in the United States in our history, but simply declaring every law on the books illegitimate because it was exclusively drafted by white men is equally absurd. And to realize how absurd it is, think about that year he picked out, 1965. Do you know what was passed and signed into law before 1965? The Civil Rights Act of 1964. So what he's arguing, if taken literally, would mean repealing the Civil Rights Act because it was authored by white men. Do you see how ridiculous and nonsensical this is yet? And again, are progressives ever going to learn that, ranting and raving about white people like this is not a good look? It comes off as divisive and polarizing, not progressive or open-minded or tolerant. And when the logical implications of the things you're popping off about on cable television are so obviously absurd, it only serves to discredit your political project. But good luck with the book sales, I guess. Up next, these journalists just revealed a terrifying story about Biden's senility. Take a listen to this clip of Amy Parnes and John Allen on The Hill's Rising talking about their book and anecdotes they're reporting about Biden's presidency that we hadn't heard about before, including one disturbing one involving fluorescent tape.
He went to a small fundraiser, fluorescent tape on the floor to guide him where he needs to go. All of this we reveal in the book for the first
fluorescent tape?
Yes. And,
show him where to go at a fundraiser at Governor Phil Murphy's house. So a small place, and it's like fluorescent tape on the floor pointing him where to go in a house. And when he goes to speak to the donors outside, he's got a teleprompter. He's and a podium, in this small patio area. that night they go in for this private dinner and he's talking about Ukraine and he's kind of making sense, and then he starts trailing off. And this happens repeatedly where he's kind of doing well and then trailing off. And finally Biden sort of realizes what's going on himself and says, you know, you guys don't want to wait anymore for your dinner. I guess I'm gonna shut up now.
Y'all, tape on the floors to tell the President of the United States where he needed to go. Yikes. I mean, I can't say it's that surprising with everything else we knew about his mental decline in the office, but they covered this up and gaslit and denied it for years. And I feel like we haven't reckoned with that enough. I mean, this dude needed a teleprompter to speak to donors in a private, closed, small setting. It is scary that we had somebody in such a serious stage of mental decline with the nuclear codes. Some people really didn't like it that I said this, but at times I said during the Biden administration, I'd rather have Kamala as president than Biden, because as much as you might disagree with her, as much as you might find her unimpressive in many ways, she's not in mental decline. She doesn't have dementia. And Biden, we can't say the same about after everything we've learned. It's just such a deep and continuing disgrace that Democratic Party operatives and their allies in mainstream media covered this up and denied it and exploited this man. I mean, to some extent, it's horrible that no one stuck up for him and took him out of the firing line, because it's terrible to put such an elderly person through this. The whole thing is such a sham, and this is just one small detail, but to me, it was a reminder of how much there still needs to be a reckoning with all the lies and all the deceit that we had about Biden's mental health and fitness for office during the 4 years he was president. Up next, this Democratic lawmaker says MAGA are all racists. Here's a clip of Jasmine Crockett that's recirculating online.
MAGA there's nothing that I could ever say or do that would make MAGA be like, that's our girl, right? Because first of all, ton of racist. So never happening.
Will they ever learn? Will Democrats ever learn that simply calling people racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, whatever, every form of bigotry under the sun, simply throwing these things around like candy on Halloween is not going to work, and that you dilute the power of these words and these accusations when you just invoke them constantly to attack your political opponents, and in situations where they are warranted, but also in situations where they're really not. It's also funny to me because Jasmine Crockett is just wrong. She could easily get MAGA to love her. All she would have to do is stop being a Democrat and talk about how she loves Trump, and MAGA would love her. They would love how brash she is. They would love how sassy she is. And MAGA voters love a black Republican, a black Trump supporter, a woman Republican, all of these things. There's actually a pretty lucrative and comfortable niche if you fit in these demographics and you do throw your weight behind the MAGA movement and President Trump. People will love you. So it's just not true that MAGA would never like her because they're all racist and hate black women. No, they don't like you because of your ideas and how you conduct yourself and the things you say. And honestly, I don't blame them. But keep playing the victim, Congresswoman Crockett, because the constant oppression Olympics and victim script, that's just working out great for the Democratic Party. But what do you guys think? Do let me know in the comments. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for this episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Please do consider subscribing if you haven't yet. Do consider hitting that like button. Thank you again to Ground News for sponsoring today's show, and we'll talk again real soon.